an absolutely buzzing, massively productive area.
There's a spirit on Merseyside that is very, very difficult to pin down, but it's linked to other cultures. It's linked to football, it's linked to politics.
It's very, very special. The people are really, really good people. They've got good values. And if they're invested in it, they'll deliver with interest on top.
The 30 years I was there, I can honestly say I enjoyed it all. It was a brilliant place to work for.
There's a special feeling, you know, in the area.
And we love it, absolutely love it, you know. We are fundamentally sustained by the local market. We have export, which allows us to grow and develop, but this business survives because of Merseyside, you know, and that's our connection to the local people.
I lived south of the East Lancs Road, and so the primary school I went to was called Knowsley Maypole. And if you looked through the railings, you could see across the East Lancs Road was a massive factory that was then called the ICI. It was a copper extrusion plant that became Yorkshire Imperial Metals. And that was the beginning of the kind of the Kirkby industrial zone, as it were.
I remember being brought up in South Dean, and the main road through South Dean is Moorgate Road, and there was a rush hour, and boy, it was a rush hour. You know, you'd look out the window and the roads would be busy, and then at the end of the day, equally the roads were busy, and they were busy with lots of people from Croxteth, Norris Green, the city centre.
The main bus route from town and Huyton and that came past our house, our prefab house. And you'd see in the morning at rush hour, 16, 17, 18 buses in a row, packed to the gills with workers coming in. An absolutely buzzing, massively productive area.
You could walk out of a job one day and start somewhere else the next. So busy.
One of my aunties worked across the roads in Pendleton's. My nan and granddad used to work in the AC Delco. I knew family and friends who worked in the craft, for instance, or Massey Ferguson's.
I worked at Otis Elevators from the late 60s to mid 70s, and the motto was the Rolls Royce of the lift industry, which it was class stuff, you know. They did the Victoria line in London, you know, the escalators and the lifts. They did the first travelator in Europe, which was at Orly Airport in France, which is now Charles de Gaulle. They did all the lift equipment and escalators on the QE2. People were friendly, there was always plenty going on, plenty of social things. They had open days, they had dancers, they had the football, American baseball, darts, you know, it was happy.
I mean, loads and loads of kids, when they left school, went to work in Kirkby because there was all those factories, Connolly and Blackley, Dickinson's, Otis Elevator, Craft, Hygiena, Birdseye.
Went to the local career service, which was in the town centre, and one of my first jobs when I left school was I was lucky enough to take up a YTS scheme at the Birdseye factory, which was on the industrial estate. The memories are really fantastic, really warm welcome. Everyone had a smile on the face, there was lots of camaraderie.
I started in the Birdseye at 15 years of age, straight from school. It was 4th of January 1960. Stayed right throughout until the place closed down in September 89. And I loved it, I absolutely loved it. Yeah, I really loved it. Produced everything, all kinds of food. I used to eat a lot of it as well.
Choose.
Yeah. This is of me when I was 15 years of age. I was in the froster room, and you'd have to struggle around to get a pair of overalls to fit me because I was about 4 foot. It was all pinched up with the pinned it and everything at the back because it was very small. But yeah, I remember that photograph well. Yeah. Well, I was fortunate enough to meet Marion there in, I was only 20 then.
I was 18 when I started, and I just found it daunting. And going into the place, it was scary. But I made a lot of good friends there. This was taken of my mum and dad who worked in the Bird's Eye. My father worked in the cold stores. My mum worked in the laundry as a seamstress. Dad worked there when I was there. He got me my job. There was a lot of families worked there. I mean, my friends there, they were twins, and both their parents worked there as well.
It's that type of place. It was very family orientated.
I was welcomed as one of the family as a 16, 17-year-old. I wasn't on much money at the time. I think it was £27.50. But, you know, they made sure I was well looked after.
It was a 44.5-hour week you worked there. When I started there, I was on 63 and 6, which is £3.3 and 6pence. And after deductions, I brought home £2.14 shillings. And £2 was to my mother, but it went a long way, that 14 shillings, yeah. We had a 17 or 18 week strike. Ooh, that was hard. An awful lot of people left. My God, you were living hand to mouth them days, like, yeah. This was actually taken during the 18-week strike, which was it was a terrible period of my employment there, because an awful lot of people suffered in that 18 weeks. But all we lived on was tax rebates, and that's all. But yeah, it was a very, very hard time. I don't like even looking at the photograph now. It brings back bad memories. It's very, very hard.
Only stayed there 6 months, and the reason for that is I actually would have been under the age of 18 at the end of the scheme, and they operated the 3-shift system at the time, and they couldn't guarantee me a job. So then I decided to return to education, went to Kirkby FE College, progressed on to Liverpool Polytechnic before getting a teacher training qualification and then entering the teaching industry. And then I suppose in a strange way I've returned home in terms of my day job, in terms of currently being a head teacher at All Saints High School.
Cracking job, met some cracking people. No matter what I went through, all the years I worked there, I met some lovely people. Wish I had my time over, I'd do it all again. And the best thing of the lot was meeting Marion there, so.
He's after something good for us too.
That's all I get, something good for me, see. Yeah.
Bird's Eye.
Yeah, no, not Bird's Eye now, no.
My dad got a chip shop on Admin Road, and it was the terminus for the buses, is where all the Kirkby buses turned around, you know. And he opened this chip shop, and it was the oddest place to open a chippy, because at night it was empty. You know, all these factories closed. You know, it was a ghost town, this place. But of course, at lunchtime, he opened and created this phenomenal business. And so it would be like, my mother would be taking orders for like Connolly's, 64 fish, 75 chips, you know, curries, peas, you know, and all these orders would come in, and various lads would come down and take home, you know, back to the factory, these massive. So it was such a buzzing place between 11:30 and 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock was all over. It was like wiped down and closed, and it wasn't open again till the next morning. And this business was phenomenal. I mean, I remember the long debate about whether they should introduce curry sauce. They agonised for 6 months over that, and in the end they saw there was a profit in it, so they did.
I remember walking up to the place first day in my good clothes, silly mistake, and it only looked like a little place from outside. And I remember walking into the back and going, oh my God, didn't know there was this many tyres. I started work at Kirkby Tyres in 1982. It was on Bradman Road in Kirkby Industrial Estate. Started with them when I was 16. The first thing that shot me, and the dirt and the smell, that rubber smell, which I don't smell anymore because I've been doing it for so long, but that was one of the biggest things that hit me when I first got there, was the rubber smell. It was just like a big massive yard, you know, with sheds around the edge, and it was just tyres stacked, but stacked on top of each other, and you're talking 18, 19 foot high,
The way they used to do it, they used to have people on each steer, and you used to pass the tyres to each other and tie them up, and you used to end up with a big pyramid of tyres. I was on £25 a week. If you come in Saturday morning, you end up working, you got a fiver, you got £30 a week. It was hard work. It was really manual, really messy, really dirty. You'd be coming home, you had to strip off before you went in the house, because it was that time. You were loading wagons coming in from Ireland, cattle wagons, and then you were loading them with tyres, and they'd been delivered a load of cows or something to somewhere, and it was covered a foot deep in cow mess and everything else, you know what I mean? One of the things, you worked in all the weathers, you know what I mean? And I think the main one is the winter in the cold, you know what I mean? And you had stupid rubber gloves which just went like ice, you know what I mean? And then you had to go around getting the tyres, get the ice out the tyres, so the people could examine and make sure they were all right. But they look after me, and I think that's one of the things why I stick with them, because they're still hands-on, they still talk, you can still talk to the management, the top management, you know what I mean, and I think that's why I've stuck at it.
I heard the studio had been bought in Kirkby, and I thought, oh, go down and have a look. And as you think of a double-fronted industrial building, that was Amazon. And to look at the band in the next room, in the studio, it was like a classroom door with the glass window part way up, so you had to jump up out your chair, knock on the glass, meme what you wanted, thumbs up, that sounds better, sit back down, do it, jump up, sit back down. I mean, I will never get it out of my mind.
It was the first studio I'd ever been in that had daylight. There were, you could see beyond the walls, and you could still see fields, beyond the window. So it was a pleasant situation to be in.
Jerry Lewis, who owned Amazon, also had a record label, which was fairly an unknown thing for record label business to be done outside of London.
I think the first artist he had out of there with the #1 was China Crisis with African and White.
And that's when I think people first became aware that there was a #1 studio on the doorstep, as it were.
I mean, I have one vague memory of China Crisis, like coming to Kirkby in a car with Jerry and knocking the lads up to discuss the African and White single sleeve. They were interested in having a Raoul Duffy painting on the sleeve. That would have involved a certain amount of copyright negotiation. So I had to transcribe that painting, in other words, copy it. We were on a real tight budget, print budget, so it had to be done in 2 colours. But what I used to do was do 2 or 3 colours and make them look like more. Anything to save money in the good old days of Merseyside indie record production, because there were the budgets went on the recording, really, and rightly so. I would have done a tracing, and the very nature of tracing it would change it slightly, but I'd certainly keep the quality of the original. After that, I would put a second piece of tracing on and then do the second colour. So there's no drawing in that place there, but I want quite a bit of red there, so I'm adding it to this layer. The whole job would have taken around 2 days. The only problem is that you can't always tell what it's going to look like, so you can have failures. But yeah, every job in a way was a revelation when it came back from the printers. And sometimes it was a good revelation and sometimes not. Hopefully most of the time it was good. But I have done some jobs that haven't worked properly, really. We always used the same printer who got used to this way of working, because nobody else was working like this. And we used local printers. Last time I used this process for an actual commercial job would have been 30 years ago, maybe more. I got a Mac in 1984. So that sort of dates it, you know, ish. But it does have a certain quality, and I do have a certain affection for it. Whether the chaps have a certain affection for it, I don't know.
We had China Crisis, we had Echo and the Bunnymen, Flock of Seagulls, Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, Happy Mondays, and the such artists which then went on to be major label hit records.
I mean, that period was a really exciting time to be associated with the music business. There was a total pop culture explosion. This one is a compilation, and it's from the early 80s, and it features tracks that were recorded at the studio here in Kirkby. It's got China Crisis, African and White on it, and that's dated January 1982. It's got Dead or Alive, Dalek I Love You, who were going to be the first band on the label, a band called The Builders, Venus Adore, and the legendary Wah. So it's a pretty good cross-section of Merseyside bands at the time. It's called Small Hits and Near Misses, which is, you know, quite a nice title really, because that is exactly what it is. Some of these were small hits and some of them were near misses. I found the image in my studio, and I just liked the image. I mean, I know that's a cop-out. If you're an art student, you can't say that to your tutor. But it was just that near-miss thing, you know, because it's these two planes that are obviously going to crash into each other. So small hits and near misses. And interestingly, the address for the record company is the same address as for the studio. So it's Amazon Studios, Stockgate Lane, Simonswood.
It was very much at the leading edge of that 80s sense of you don't have to be in metropolitan land in order to make records, you know.
But before that, everybody got the deal, the record deal, and then to London to record. It was off down to London for whichever studio you were going in. But Jeremy made it happen up here, and he was bringing the artists from London. He made it happen here on Merseyside and for Merseyside.
But it did mean that all this stuff that was produced on Merseyside, either out of ignorance or whatever, it did have a special quality to it, you know, a really special quality to it.
Frank Hornby was the son of a provisions dealer in Liverpool, family business, and one Christmas got this really, really good idea on a train journey where he stopped at a railway station, looked across at the goods yard, and there was a crane, and he thought, well, hang on, I've got two lads. I can make something like this to keep my lads busy at Christmas time. So he got off the train, came roaring home and started making things from strips of copper, punching holes in, and from there it developed into Meccano. He had started the business with a loan from his employer with a fiver, which in the 1890s it was quite a lot of money. Meccano started its life as Mechanics Made Easy, and within 2 years of this, Frank had already cottoned on to the marketing power of the right name. And he decided that Mechanics Made Easy was too much of a mouthful, particularly if you wanted to attract kids. So he came up with the name, which was Make and No. Meccano, Meccano. Very, very rapidly grew. Within just a few years, it expanded through Europe. He was almost caught in the Berlin offices when war broke out, but he managed to get away. And then he bought the land to build Binns Road, which is most definitely the most famous toy factory in the world. At any one time, 2,500 employees working in there. In the early 20s, Frank Hornby, who was already one of the most successful toy manufacturers in the world, decided that he would expand from his core activity making Meccano and move into the toy market. So he came up with the idea of trains, so that a father, his son, and maybe a few friends could get around in the evening, construct an entire layout, run the trains, and just have a really good time. What Frank did was to construct an entire outfit. Everything that he needed to be made here on Merseyside. Everything from the track, to the rolling stock, to the animals in the cages, to the signals, even the trackside buildings. We think that this particular train station was modelled on one that stood only a few yards in front of his home, which he would have seen on a daily basis. An interesting fact about the actual railways themselves, the first ones ran on 240 volts. And of course, if there was a young lad who was playing with his father and the train came off the tracks, you would naturally reach across. And of course, you were reaching across 240 volts, so they rapidly changed it to 6 volts. They developed some small scale model cars which were called miniatures. One day, one of the sons, who then worked for Frank, had one of these model miniatures in his hand, and his wife came in. He said, "What do you think of that, darling?" And she said, "That's Dinky." And that's how Dinky Toys got the name. So we had Meccano, you had Hornby trains, you had Hornby Double-O, Dinky Builder, there was Dolly Vod and Doll's House Furniture, and it just goes on and on and on. In his day, Frank Hornby was as big as Dyson, as big as Alan Sugar. He was of the same sort of strength of Branson and such like. He would have employed that many people. The business was absolutely massive. And to think that even though many of these are up to 100 years old, as you can see, they're still running smoothly, and still a sheer joy to watch and listen to. My tenuous link to this is my father was the coalman who delivered the fuel that fired the furnaces that melted the metal that made the toys. So that's my link, and I'm very, very proud of that. But yes, I do have a train set.
When my brother said, "Come and work in the drum shop," I literally thought they were drums. I had no idea, but I was keen. My first week's wages at the BI was nearly £12, which is fantastic. So, giving half of that to my mum, I had £6 more or less to spend in the week, and it was brilliant. My brother worked there already, and my dad worked in the iron foundry. He was a furnaceman. It really seemed old-fashioned. We used to come out of the BI after the hooter, you'd hear the hooter go, and I can just recall little old men, more or less bent double, leaning forward with haversacks on and gabardine macks and caps, all sort of marching out together, all bent like L.S. Lowry pictures. It really was Dickensian in some parts. I can remember you could look over a chest-high doorway into a room, and the floor was lined with big steel sheets, and they had guys with tongs grabbing hot rods of copper, I assume, and they were fed them through spinning rollers. They were all gradually narrower and narrower, and as they fed it through, it pulled, and a chap on the other side grabbed it with the tongs as it came through, and then he'd pass it through the next one, which was marginally narrower. Of course, this red hot ribbon of copper was getting longer and faster, and it just snake through, and they'd just jump over it and grab hold of the end of it and feed it back through the next. And it'd be like 30, 40 yards long, red, still glowing red, bouncing off the floor. Just unbelievable. Constantly smoking, sawdust everywhere, timber. It was bizarre. Everything was a danger. Even once you'd cut the thing into a circle, you had to get it from one point to another. You would just roll it. You would be rolling something weighing 200 weight, 300 weight, 2 inches wide or 7, 8 foot high, in between people to get to where you were going, and then you would just let it fall onto a bench while they drilled holes in it, pick it back up, take it to the next process. Never a dull moment. Playing football at dinner time in the timber yard, in and out of the stacks of timber. No one got away uninjured. It wasn't just industrial injuries, mainly football related. Given the work I was doing, it was very repetitive and using a hammer. I mean, my right forearm is a different shape to my left through hammering constantly. I don't know if you can see that. And that's just purely through using a hammer all day. And that's 30 years ago, and it's still the same. But industrial injury, I never claimed for it. Some of the strongest men I've ever known I worked with, unbelievably strong. And a lot of that was down to the amount of food we ate in there. And of a morning, you used to have a can lad, and he'd take your order for your breakfast. And a lot of the bigger blokes, it was a bit of a competition to see just what you could fit on between 2 rounds of bread. And they'd have cheese, sausage, egg, bacon, beans, a Mars bar, and it just got out of hand. And they must have spent the wages on a week's breakfast. My dad was a furnaceman, but he would go inside the machine with a pneumatic drill and drill off the slag that had built up on the inside of the furnace. No hearing protection to speak of. I mean, they had it, but it was neither use nor ornament, given what he was doing. He used to come home, shirt all burnt and all burns across his stomach, and where the hot metal had burned through his clothes, and gather at his belt, and he'd have to shake it out, but he'd have all dots of white skin all around him. I've got photographs of my dad with the guys that he worked with, and faces black with sweat and muck, all sat round having a cup of tea, all smiling. Never changed. I remember he used to run up and take his butties if he'd forgotten his lunch. We used to stand by the gate and he'd come, and we'd pass him his butties through the gate. Sometimes we didn't have the bread. We had to wait till the bread man came to make my dad butties to take up. So it was a big family-orientated affair. Every aspect of your life was encapsulated in the BI. You could work there and go of an evening and relax in the club or on the football pitches. So it was a major impact on people's lives in Prescot.
Every Friday night the big band came up to the leisure centre and we had long dresses and dances. And I worked at the BICC from when I was 19 to 23. I worked in the typing pool, and in my case I typed the accounts department. This is the magazine from the BICC, and if you look in there at all the contracts, it's worldwide, you know, so it's not just England. And that's actually my daughter, who worked in the wages department. My sister was the receptionist there and over the telephone exchange. My brother-in-law worked in the insurance department. My father worked in the factory. I'm not sure what he did. He was just manual labour. Everybody in Prescot worked there practically.
You wanted your relatives to work at the BI. You'd ask the foreman, can I get my lad a job here? It was the main employer in the area and they were good. BICC cables were used in transatlantic communications. That's pretty big. So they were proud of it. I just remember it as being a great deal of fun. We made drums along the way as well.
My name's Cohen Armstrong and I worked for Lucas Aerospace. I joined Lucas Aerospace in 1983. Did a 4-year apprenticeship and after that I got taken on and worked there for 31 years. My dad worked there and my brother worked there as well. My dad was an engineer 40, 50 years. My 2 brothers are engineers. I mean, it was a job for life when I started there. And when we left, if you're in an engineering place, it's a sign of respect and they give you a bang out. It's a sign of respect, and when the whole factory stops and just bangs you out on the machines, spanners, bang, and you've got to do a walk down the centre of the factory, and it was emotional, very, very emotional. I remember waking up on the Monday morning, and I woke up, and what do we do now? I mean, I've never been redundant, ever. As soon as I left school, I got a job there. I've been there 31 years. What do we do now? I mean,
I'm Sylvia Walker, but my maiden name was Taylor, and it wasn't until my father died in 1988 and I was going through his papers that I worked out that he was actually born in Prescot, and not only that all his family had been here going back to 1745. This little tatty notebook is the first thing I saw when I was going through my dad's papers. At first I thought it was his notebook, but when I looked at some of the dates I realised it was his grandfather's. 1864, explosion at Liverpool of gunpowder, about 11.5 tons on board the Lottie sleigh on Friday night. About 20 minutes past 7. He was very exact. It was commanded by Captain Webber and it was bound for the west coast of Africa. It shook houses in Prescot and broke windows across the area. January the 15th, 1864. There's other things like cricket matches locally. There's a lot about the weather. I mean, here's one about no fortnight fairs held in Prescot, Lancashire, on account of the cattle plague called Rinderpest. That's 1866. Which is funny, isn't it? Because look how tatty it is. It could have just been slung. And because I'm a bit of a hoarder, like my dad and my granddad were, we've still got this little notebook and can shed a light on local history. My great-grandfather, he worked in the watchmaking industry, and particularly as a file maker. Apparently, he presented his files at the Great Exhibition in London, and he won a gold medal. They were used for the watchmaking, but they were also used for dentist tools. Any fine metalwork, you had to use files. They were known as Lancashire files, and they were the best in the country. My grandfather, Joseph Critchley Taylor, he was apprenticed as a printer. This document is an indenture, and it was drawn up for any apprentice. So in this case, it's related to my grandfather, Joseph Critchley Taylor. It describes conditions, what he must do. And basically, the apprentice, at this time, 1891, was bound to his master. And this is where it lists his name, Joseph Critchley Taylor. He was operating from Short Street, which I believe became Chapel Street, and he ended up running the Prescot Weekly Times. So I'm very proud of that. Well, this photograph was in a Victorian photograph album, and this is my grandfather on the left, Joseph Critchley Taylor, and this over here is his younger brother and two young apprentices. And what they're holding is a typeset, a tray, and it is for the Prescot Weekly Times. And I think this would have been taken either in Chapel Street or in Eccleston Street. This is the shop that he had in Chapel Street. And I've got a copy of this where my dad put an X in the top window, and he said that's where I was born in 1913. So the family lived in these premises and in this area for a long time. Although we seemed to have this successful business, when war broke out, First World War, the Ministry of Munitions decided to take over the printing business, all the equipment, and it was auctioned. And so he was without a job. He had a young family. My father never talked about his family. I think, that generation didn't. So I didn't know anything until after he'd gone, and I found all these papers and started looking through them and putting pieces together. And so now I wish I could talk to him about it, but it's always too late. So I'd say to anyone, talk to your family while they're here. They've had interesting lives.
I was an apprentice compositor at Tinlings from 1970 till when it closed in 75. At that time, it was probably one of the biggest printers on Merseyside. I come here as a 17.5-year-old. It was great training, but it was also, I look back at it with favourably, it was really good times. So this is where I used to get off the bus. It was the 5:10 or the 10. And then into work. I think this part of it is certainly well over 100 years old. There was a big bookbinding department. There was litho printers, there was letterpress printers, there was compositors, so it was the whole works under one roof really. This used to be the main entrance. There was a couple of offices to the left, and then there was a narrow corridor in front where you had to clock in. So it's usually a mad scramble with a minute to go for everyone to clock in. I remember distinctly what I think got me the job. They asked you to spell words, and one of the words was Q, which I didn't know I knew how to spell, but I sort of figured it out as I was going along, and she seemed to be really impressed with that. And from that moment, like, I felt confident of getting the apprenticeship, which I did. So you used to go down a narrow corridor here. On your left was what they called the linotype machines. On the right was the new computers. And as you went into, this opened up into a big room where all the compositors were. So this is where all the magazines, books and catalogue were prepared. So within there you'd have your magazine section, little catalogue section and your book section. So this would have been the corridor leading on to the main room, which housed all the compositors who used to produce all the magazines, the catalogues and the books. What a compositor did was mainly he worked with individual pieces of type, put them into words, make them into lines and build up the pages that way. Also, obviously, with magazines there'd be pictures, so they build that into the picture. So you had a layout, what it looked like, and then you had to produce the page. You'd wrap it in what they called a chase, so it didn't move, and it was the chase that went to the printing press to be printed. You had your cases with all the type in, and you had to learn the layout of the type cases, because it wasn't like A, B, C, D. It was done in an order which is supposed to be. A bit like when you a QWERTY keyboard, it's not A, B, C, D, it's different. And it's someone's worked out that the easiest way to do it. So you, as an apprentice, you had to learn the layout of the case. That was the first thing you did. So then you'd automatically went to the individual letters without looking. It sounds very antiquated now, and it is, but at the time, that's what printers did. But at lunchtime, that's where everyone had the lunch. So there'd be poker schools going on. Sort of 5 minutes before the end of lunch, you might have 100 people standing round, you know, waiting for the poker game to finish. I come here as a 17-and-a-half-year-old. It was good. It was really good at that age to be involved in.
At the same time as working in Amazon, I started my own company called Rainhill Tape Specialists, and then shortened to RTS. We moved to Prescot, and the only place we could find big enough for us was the old Tinlings building. That used to be an army barracks. And when we were moving in and we had builders in, we were knocking through to put access into the backyard for the stacker truck. And what we didn't realise was the wall the builders were knocking through was actually a massive cavity. So they found a love letter and a piece of jewellery in there once we got some lights in, and the love letter was from a young lady to her boyfriend who was a Lance Corporal. We had a couple of studios. These were post-production studios, and we started duplicating cassettes for local bands, local people, churches, choirs, local radio, everything Billy Butler did with hits you couldn't get, and the old famous Hold Your Plums on a Sunday morning. All that went onto tape, and Billy and Wally would come up to our place and they'd go through all the editing, and then we'd churn them out. I mean, one year we did 1 million cassettes for local gigging artists, just to sell at clubs on Saturday night, at Friday night, whatever. And Rick Astley was one of those, with his band FBI.
company was started originally in 1966. It got started by my uncle Stephen, who was a hobby craft leather worker beforehand. He used to do like craft fairs, trade shows, things like that. So he was at a craft fair in London, so he was on the side of a street with a display and a mini workshop. And he was making things, and he had a display of his products. A chap walked along that was looking at the stand and was looking at a bag that he'd made for, it's like a school satchel, classic school satchel. And he's looking at this thing and looking at Steve, and Steve spoke to him and said, "You all right, mister?" Steve actually thought he was in trouble. He thought, he didn't realise that the classic satchel design had been around since Shakespearean times, and it's just part of the British public domain of copyright designs, you know. He's looking at this thing and he said, "Did you make this?" And he's like, "Yes, sir." You know, and he says, "Is anything wrong?" So he says, "I can't just have him here looking at this bag, and I've got to kind of find out what's going on." So he says, Is there anything wrong? He says, "No." He says, "Well, okay, would you like to buy it?" And he says, "No, young man, I'd be interested in buying 200 of them." And that led to a conversation which started the Leather Satchel Company. But back when my uncle started the business, companies were named after the products they made. The Brass Widget Company, the Sliced Bread Company, the Leather Satchel Company. It's like, yeah, because they can find us in the yellow pages when they need us or whatever, you know. I grew up being around leatherwork with my uncles, obviously in the business, running the business. I lived in the same house as them, so it was part of our everyday life working with leather. And I basically used to go, like on a Saturday, I'd go in with them, or during school holidays, I'd go in, "Can I go to the workshop?" You know, and it'd be great for me. You know, I loved it. And so that's how I got involved in the business. At 16, I started my apprenticeship. We made all kinds. So my uncle Steve's actually trained as a clog maker as well. So we used to make clogs. I can remember I was the lad, and I've got all these boxes, and I'm going, "By heck, there's a lot of these." He says, "Heavy." I'm going, "Are these all clogs, Uncle Barry?" Yeah. "Who are they for?" "Queen." I was like, "The Queen wears clogs?" He says, "No, the banyan, you idiot." You know what I mean? We used to have a guy we nicknamed Brummy, his name was Keith, but he used to go on the road and basically flog all our stuff out the back of a van to local retailers and shops. So he'd look at stuff, what we had, he'd go, "Oh, I've got loads of guitar straps." I'll go to visit all the music shops, and he'd travel around. "Do you want any music straps? What do you need, a saxophone or guitar?" "Yes, a guitar." "Yeah." And he'd just do cash and carry out the back of a van to all these shops. "Do you need any bags? I've got some bags." "Yeah, they're lovely, aren't they?" All our straps are in all these independent music shops all around the country. We'd watch Top of the Pops, and then we go, "Has he got one? Barry, is that one of our straps?" So we then started playing a game every Friday night. We'd be watching Top of the Pops to see who's got our strap on, which is really cool. You go, "Oh my God, the Oasis lads have got one of our straps on." You'd be really excited. So we used to play like the strap football and see who can spot the straps. The list, honestly, it's endless. Absolutely endless. You'd think we were the only strap maker in the world, but it's just funny, you know. The market for satchels gradually declined to the point where we were the last remaining satchel maker in the UK until there was just my uncles, Uncle Steve, Uncle Barry, Uncle Paul. Harry Potter came along. Everyone suddenly saw like this old vintage style, and the kids were like, I want to be like Harry Potter, I want a Harry Potter bag. And the company started growing and growing and growing. And you know, and what was 30, 40 satchels a month was soon, oh, okay, we're going to make 2,000 this month. This is a business again. And we thought it'd die down again, you know, and it just didn't. It's kept growing ever since. We get this call one day from the Mayor of Liverpool. He says, I've got some guests coming. We'd like to present them with a gift. I'm going like, who is it? He says, I can't really say. And I'm like, well, I just need some bags off you. I says, to be honest, I need to know who it's for so I can make the right bag that's suitable for them. And then he says, okay, but don't tell anyone. And he says, I've got Prince William coming to the city and we want to present him with some of your bags as a gift. So I'm like, oh my God. I mean, such an honour. So we ended up making 3 backpacks for George, Charlotte and Louis, little kids' backpacks. And they were presented and Prince William picks them up. The beautiful thing, the very first thing he said, wow, these are really good quality, aren't they? The first thing he did, this is a guy who must handle the best quality items in the world, and picks up one of our utility satchels and says that. So it's like, it's absolutely fantastic. So then looks directly at me and my wife and says, did you make these? And we're like, yeah. And then just comes and talks to us for like 5 minutes, asking everything about the company. And it just goes a bit nuts after that. So the press pick up on it, it hits national and international newspapers, to the point whereby on the front page of cosmopolitan.com there's Princess Charlotte, the Queen of Sass, free in brackets, now has a better bag than you. You know what I mean? And it just went nuts. The website was crashing left, right and centre. We were like, get it back up, get it back up. Just incredible, the amount of support we got from like all over the world, people visiting, buying, everyone wanting to buy a bag just like Princess Charlotte. And I think there's a real renaissance of handcrafted goods, having a relationship with your local makers and seeing that quality and buying locally. And the beauty of what we do is really appreciated by the local people, like the people of Merseyside. I think that's one of the reasons why we were the last satchel maker as well. It's just incredible support here, you know, it's like, and we love it, absolutely love it, you know. We are fundamentally sustained by the local market. We have export, which allows us to grow and develop and take part in other things, but this business survives because of Merseyside, you know, and that's our connection to the local people.